Okay, we are gonna dive in quickly because we've got a lot of questions, and what's beautiful is you all can keep on sending in questions and we'll collate them, and then we'll keep addressing them like this. And I just want to assure you your questions will be answered. So how are you doing? Why don't you say how are you doing in the chat? Maybe one word, just so I can feel you a little bit. Get us underway. Okay. So, yay, there we go. Relief, there's one. Yes, busy. Yes. Fantastic. Yay. Okay, good. My mama's visiting, so I'm doing daughter duty, daughter play. Okay. So here's where I want to start. I've got a nice little printed up list of questions, and very much so today, hopefully there'll be room to answer more questions. So you can also make the chat very active, and I will refer to as much as possible as I go. And then Caitlin and Bruna can also catch me up if I miss anything. So the place that I wanted to start is a playful place, which is that remember how early on I did the fire signs, and I said that Aries is like a match struck, and zing, here's a new idea. Leo is like a pot-bellied stove or a campfire, warming all those near, right? And then I said Sagittarius is like the forest fire, or I was thinking it's also kind of like, when they burn for fire protection, it's like they burn everything down so that we're actually, it's sort of like an energy used for the good instead of just a raging forest fire. So anyway, a number of people have written in and asked if I would do that for the other elements. So they may not be as neat and perfect as the fire signs, but I'm going to give you some images for the other elements in terms of the progression. Okay. So here's how I would begin. Let's begin with water. So water for the Cancer energy, I would give the bathtub or the womb, right? It's the place where we feel safe and we're in our home, and it's small and warm and wet and protected. So Cancer would be the bathtub, which is just like the Aries match, right? Scorpio would be like the deep well. So at first there's some muck on the surface maybe, and you have to get through the muck. But if you lower the water, if you lower the cup into the depths of it, you have the crispest, coolest, most satisfying water you've ever drunk. So you got to go down, and you've got to get beyond the muck. So that's what I would give Scorpio, okay? And you know what? I mean, these are just my little creations. And so obviously you can do the same, but you can riff on these. Pisces, it's the ocean, and it's the ocean that connects us all, and it's vast, and it receives all, and it morphs all the boundaries because it touches every continent, so it's the all-inclusive, deep, synthesizing ocean. So we go from the bathtub to the ocean. Okay. Now, yes, Earth, let's go to Earth. I would give Taurus like a beautiful potted, gorgeous plant, like the most exotic, beautiful, or not even exotic. It could be just one gorgeous rose, or it could be like I don't know, I was going to say succulent, but succulents are under the Cancer energy. But Taurus would be like a beautiful single potted plant, and you're watering it and you're like, it's so beautiful. It's bringing so much beauty to my life. Virgo would be more like the herb garden. It would be like, it would be the garden, but it would be very purposeful as well as beautiful. It would be like, I can make all the tinctures from this herb garden, right? And beautiful and useful. And then Capricorn would be like the sequoia or the mountain, both earthy. So it would be like the energy of what grows over time, or what you achieve over time. So this Capricorn energy of endurance and longevity and persistence. So we climb the mountain, or we watch this, we stand in front of this tree that's 5,000 years old, and we're like, oh, I guess I could be a little more patient, right? So Capricorn has, and yes, my insides have been burned out and birds are living in them and I'm still alive. Okay, that's Capricorn. And actually we went, I love the great trees, and we went to see them with my son Dylan and Kate, and he sat in one of them where it had been burned out, and Dylan sat in one of them and was like meditating or just closed his eyes and, in the middle of this tree. And I just thought it was the most beautiful image for what's possible for growth, for evolution over time, for stillness. Okay. And there's something about the Capricorn that you feel in the mountain and the sequoia that brings that stillness, right? Good. And then I would give air, I would sort of went a couple directions with air, but I would, if we're just talking pure communication of air, like what's Gemini? It's the text, right? It's just sudden, like it's all the constant back and forth, and it's superficial information, let's say. So, but it's the quick exchange. Or you could go in the realm of the hummingbird. You could go in the realm of like air and birds, and it's the hummingbird. It's like, I get sustenance here, sustenance here, sustenance here, right? For Libra, I have this image of like a couch conversation, right? You're sitting on the couch, having the most beautiful back and forth. And you could even think about it as like, one exhales, one inhales, one exhales, one inhales. So it's the Libran beautiful conversation where you have more substance. And it's not to say that if you're a Gemini, you can't have gorgeous, substantial conversations, but it's the texture of the sign, okay? And then Aquarius, who was it? Who was the first president? I can't remember who it was, but talked about the 1,000 points of light, right? It was one of the Bushes, I think. But anyway, somebody was his speechwriter. But the 1,000 points of light, and think the globe surrounded by light, surrounded by a matrix of light, that is Aquarius. And if you could imagine like somebody pressing a button and it going, when you see like a button pressed and everything comes alive technologically and electricity, that's Aquarius. That's the sharing and spreading of information. Aquarius is connected to the internet. So tweets, Gemini, or texts, phone calls, long conversations, and then the whole internet itself, Aquarius. I know on some level these are fun and playful, but if you let yourself like deepen into it and riff on any of these, you can come up with a ton more. But it's kind of a lovely way to learn, is just create images for yourself. And I'm glad you asked the question, because I actually don't create images like that enough for myself. And they're the things you remember. That's why people are reaching out. It's like, oh, I can remember that, right? And that will get me into the sign itself. So good. Okay. And let me see, I'm somehow not, here we go, chat. Did I miss any questions as they were coming up?
One that's not directly related to that, but just a general questions about houses if we have time. Yes. And then Anne-Marie wanted one last time, what did you use for Sag?
Sag, I used the forest fire. Sag is the big forest fire that is like the match, the campfire, and then the one that's almost out of control and can be, because Sagittarius has a little bit of recklessness to it. So, and it has a little bit of like the big fire as opposed to but another way to think about the third element of the third sign of every element is that sign can be, all signs can be used for the benefit of all, but the Sagittarius, Capricorn, Aquarius, Pisces energies and the 9th, 10th, 11th, 12th house have something very distributive, like to humanity, like the big ideas, the big missions to help humanity, the big distributions, the big world savior energy. So it tends to take the energy away from the little self to the distributive energy in the big picture of the zodiac. Again, please don't read that as an Aries is less evolved than a Pisces. It's not that. It's like, but in the big journey of the zodiac, those last 4 signs have a lot to do with that kind of connection to humanity. So good. Yes, we're going to definitely, let's move on then, because one of the first questions, and we got a lot of questions about this, is the house system. And what I say to you is probably going to be partially annoying and partially relieving. And, but I'll say this, I used Placidus because it's in my lineage. Alan Oken used Placidus. My father used Placidus. It made sense to me. I learned it that way. The Placidus house system is based on time. It was developed during the Renaissance. And basically, the moment you're born, you have the ascendant moment. And then what they do, the astrologers creating Placidus would do is they would take 2 hours, let the 2 hours go by, and then they'd mark that the next degree that would have been at the horizon at that point. And that's the marker for the second house. And so they keep letting 2 hours go by. And that means that the houses are going to be unequal in size. So that's one way of approaching it. The problem with Placidus, and it is a problem, is if you go too far north or too far south, the houses get wonky and you get these tiny, tiny little houses. So guess what? At that point, I would say, yes, bring in equal house system or bring in whole house system. I don't want you, somebody asked, saying that she was struggling to resonate with her planets in the Placidus system because she's been using the whole sign system. So I say use both, like completely drop into the whole sign system and the Placidus system. And I would encourage you to keep thinking about the positions that don't make sense for you in the Placidus system and see if you can dig a little bit. But it's not an exact science yet, right? We don't have the perfect house system. We're still exploring. Many astrologers, I mean, Placidus is one of the most popular, but of course, like the astrologers like Chani Nicholas now are really advocating the whole sign system. The only thing that I don't love myself about the whole sign system is, like, if you had Leo rising, you'd put 0 degrees Leo at the horizon line. And what I don't like about that as a soul-centered astrologer is the rising sign point is so important. And I like to see the exact degree at the ascendant, even though in whole sign system, it still identifies the ascendant, but it doesn't prioritize it in some way. So that's my own preference around that. But please, if you are like, oh my God, whole sign system is it for me, and it makes so much sense to me, use it, because we're learning and we're researching. And sometimes, like, I look at my Saturn and I'm like, is my Saturn an 8th house Saturn or is it a 9th house Saturn? And I can make a case for both. But when I really hone in and get quiet and think about it, I'm like, it's a 9th house Saturn, So you can see how these house systems are different in the sense that one has to do with time and one has to do, like, some of them have to do with degrees, like 30 degrees, 30 degrees, 30 degrees. And there are plenty of house systems, I'm not going to go through them all, where you can look at what calls out to you. Porphyry is another one that a lot of people like, and sidereal is a whole nother world. Sidereal is a whole nother world that I'm not even going to go into, but it's like, basically, it's a huge difference between, it's like 25 to 26 degree difference with the signs. And it's a whole, steeped in the Indian tradition of astrology. And it's a valid approach as well, but I have not studied it deeply. And if somebody else has and wants to speak to it, that's fine. But for now, what I'm going to invite you to is I'm going to invite you to experiment. And if you have the program, you can be like, what does my chart look like with Porphyry? What does my chart look like with Regiomontanus? What does my chart look like with Placidus? There are like 15 to choose from. But in my own honest speaking, I use Placidus because it makes sense to me, because I grew up with it. And because when I look to other astrologers that I really respect, a lot of them have chosen Placidus. Yeah. Mady, have you always used Placidus, or have you used other systems?
Always Placid.
Okay. Yeah. Okay, good. So hopefully that, I know it's not completely satisfying, and we could probably spend an entire class where I was breaking down the house systems, but frankly, those of you that have cuspy planets, those are going to be the ones where it's like, oh, is it second house or is it third house? And just study both and experiment with both. And I would even say invite both, okay? And there was a question that somebody also had, and I'm going to bring that up from further down, but like when a planet, let me just go ahead and open a chart. Hang on one second. I'm going to bring up Laura's chart because she has a question later, but I'm just going to bring it up right now because I have it. So there was another question from somebody that said, speaking of houses, what if a planet is right here, right at the cusp between two houses, between the 11th and the 12th house, between any house? What if it's right before it enters? And I might even say, what if Pluto was at 4 degrees Scorpio and the cusp is 5 degrees Scorpio? She was asking, do I read it in the 11th house or do I read it in the 12th house? Guess what I'm going to say, friends? I'm going to say read it in both. And I'm also going to say, and she said, would you lean in one direction? And the truth is, I would lean in the direction of the house it's heading into. That's what I would lean in the direction of. But I would absolutely ask you to rigorously think about Pluto in the 11th and Pluto in the 12th. I mean, this one, Pluto is 3 degrees away from the cusp, so I would tend to keep it more 11th. But if it's a degree away, I would be looking at the 12th house. So if a planet is leaning in, lean into the next house. And like something like this, if it's already entered the second house when you're born, for example, if Neptune already entered the second house, guess what? It chose to enter the second house. So don't even think about the first house because it's made its way on. Okay. Okay. So any questions about that?
Nicole has a question about cusp degrees.
What about them? What's the cusp? Do you want to ask it, Nicole? Do you want to get on and ask it? I'm not sure what the question is.
Yes. Can you hear me?
Yeah. Uh-huh.
Well, when you were talking about the 11th and the 12th houses, and you were like, well, Pluto is just like 2 degrees away.
Yeah. Yeah.
From the cusp. So does that mean the cusp is like 7 degrees? Like, how do you figure out what your cusp degree? Do you know what I'm saying?
Yeah. Good question. Okay. Thank you. You guys are, yes. So again, this is a funny thing to say, but it's a kind of also an intuitive feel. So look right here. Here's the 2 degrees of Scorpio. And here's the 5 degrees of Scorpio. So that means there's 3 degrees away before it's going to enter. So 3 degrees to me feels like it's sitting right in between, but it's still enough in the 11th house. So like, I almost I'll put it this way. I almost treat it like a conjunction. And I don't know if we even started to talk about this, but like, if the sun is sitting next, like here, if this is a conjunction, the moon and Saturn are sitting next to each other. It's called a conjunction. How far are they away from each other? They're 6 degrees away. So I would consider this, they are sitting next to each other because a conjunction can go up to even 9 degrees. So in some ways, I would, Pluto would be considered conjunct the 12th house cusp, even up to 7, 8, 9 degrees. But it's when it's within a degree that I'm like, it's just wanting to push over. It's like wanting to be in the next house. So you have to do some math. You have to do some math and you have to be like, how many degrees is this away? And do I feel like it's leaning into the next house or not? Or do I feel like it has some breathing room? Think about this like a doorway almost. How far away is Pluto from entering the door of the 12th house? It's 3 steps back right now. If it was 1 step back, you know, it might be gung gung, I'm opening it. But if it's 3 or 4 or 5 steps back, it's still in the room. Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you.
Does that help? Okay. Okay. These are excellent questions. And, you know, it's interesting to teach something like astrology because some of it is so specific and so like, you know, A plus B equals C. And a lot of it is your intuition as a reader in terms of meeting the person, feeling into the quality of Pluto, feeling into where it's landing in their house, and also just deciding for yourself how far away from the door is close enough to the door to enter into the next house, okay? Okay. So the next question was, and I'm gonna zoom through some of these, somebody asked about the asteroids. We will be covering the asteroids. We will cover Vesta, Juno, Ceres, and Pallas. This is Pallas. We'll get to those later in our class together, but we will cover them. They're very important. They're divine feminine placements. They're, you know, the roles of the wife and the mother and the daughter and the sister and the fullness of each of those roles. And Demetra George in the 70s really brought them to the forefront and their powerful placements. So we will cover those, but not today. Somebody asked me, what's your take on the idea of a cusp? Okay, now they're talking about the sun sign. And so I'm going to say to you, with the sun sign, somebody said, what do you feel about a 29-degree sun? This is interesting. And it's different than how I feel about the houses, because what I feel about a 29-degree sun is that that degree is enormously powerful. And the soul chose to still reincarnate in this particular energy to work it out. Okay. So I actually don't think of it as, oh, there are lots of, but lots of qualities of like say it's a 29-degree Pisces sun. Oh, but lots of Aries qualities. There might be lots of Aries qualities because Mercury is in Aries, Venus is in Aries, you know, but a 29-degree sun is like, figure it out, guys. You know, figure it out, little sweet soul self. And it's got an intensity to it, as far as I'm concerned, particularly with the sun sign. Does anyone want to argue with me? It's okay. or not even argue, just suggest an alternative. But I mean, I don't know. I just, yeah, I just feel I've noticed that. The only thing to say about the sun's degrees, there's not a lot to say about them except that 29th degree, and that there are 30 degrees of the sun and there are 30 degrees of every sign. So that's what I would say. And yeah, okay. But ask more, MB. If they're in terms of what you want to know about the sun degrees. Okay. Now, Placidus cusps. Okay, now here's another question. I guess I'm just going to go ahead and bring Laura's chart back up because it's right there. And we've talked about this a little bit, but I'm going to say it again. Somebody's asking, what happens if you have a sign ruling 2 houses, right? And we have that again, because I'm using Placidus, because it's every 2 hours, and because the degree is not an equal degree, the houses are not the same size. So some of the houses are really big or bigger, and some of the houses are smaller. So that means that in this case, Laura has Taurus ruling her 6th house and her 7th house. You see that? Taurus ruling 6th, Taurus ruling 7th, and she's got Scorpio ruling her 12th and Scorpio ruling her 1st house, okay? So all it means is that you, again, have to think about Taurus in terms of her day-to-day work and her health, and Taurus in terms of her relationships. This sign, Taurus and Scorpio, are enormously important in her chart because they take over more territory. This is called an intercepted sign, which happens because there's a sign, there are two signs left out, right? There are two signs that aren't going to rule a house. Cancer's not going to rule a house and Capricorn's not going to rule a house. Why? Because the entirety of the Cancerian sign is included in the 8th house. All 30 degrees are in the 8th house. All 30 degrees of Capricorn are in the 2nd house. So just to show you, now just stay with me. If I were going to look at the 2nd house of Laura's chart, I would say, okay, 27 degrees is on the cusp. That means that the 28th degree, the 29th degree, and the 30th degree of Sagittarius are all in her 2nd house, okay? Then we move into Capricorn. So then we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, all the way to 30 degrees of Capricorn, all in her 2nd house. And then we have 2 degrees of Aquarius in her 2nd house, because the cusp for the 3rd house is 2 degrees Aquarius. Okay, does that make sense? Whereas, let's go over here just for a second, because I want you to get the idea of these 30 degrees of every sign. So let's just look at her 7th house for a second. 26 degrees Taurus. That means 27, 28, 29, 30 Taurus are in her 7th house. And then we start with 1 degree Gemini, 1 degree, 2 degree, 3 degree, 4 degree, all the way up to 27 degrees Gemini are all in her 7th house. That's why, and some of you ask this question, that's why sometimes you have a sign ruling a house, but you have planets in another sign. Okay, we putting it together? Sometimes it takes a minute and then we go, oh, I understand. At last. Okay. All right. Good. Okay. So somebody asked questions. There were a number of questions like, is this bad? Like, I have Mercury and Leo sitting next to my sun in Leo. Is this bad? You need never ask that question again. It is not bad. There's no bad. There's no bad. There's no bad. There's only opportunity. And there's only sometimes delicious pressure, sometimes a slight discomfort that leads to breakthrough, but do not label anything in your chart bad. Okay? Because if I did that with my chart, I'd be really depressed. So, right? Just like it's all opportunity, it's all growth, it's all, oh, how could I, like, let's just say, we were talking about Mercury and Leo last time, losing some of its, not being in an uncomfortable position. So if Mercury and Leo is in an uncomfortable position, what do? We step into that Leo when it comes to our voice in the world, and we like call upon that Leo to shine forth, to be heard in a new way. Okay. Nothing is bad. Yes. And guess what? This is the other piece that Caitlin was like, don't forget to remind them about this. And I was like, you are right. The other piece is free will. Free will. The other piece is when you know your, when you know the design, you get to engage with it how you will. Nothing is being impressed upon you. Nothing is being like, you're not being directed. I mean, there is a design and you're in it and you're dancing with it, but you get to decide how you're dancing with it. And that's like the transits. We get to decide how we're going to meet the transit. And I think I was saying this in the last class, but yeah, I was saying it, that I was reading, you know, esoteric astrology again, and I'd gone back to the beginning, and yeah, I go back to the beginning, and I had this sort of revelation around the fact that she was saying that as you advance and you evolve, you can really, whatever chart you have, you're like, that's lovely and that's an opportunity, but I can make it work in a totally different way, or I can, you know, it's not going to crunch me down. I'm free in a way. It's an opportunity, but I'm free. Yeah. So free will is a big part of this. Okay, another question. Right, I'm getting, no, that's question. Yeah, ruler of the house or sign. I'm just going to read this out loud, and I don't know if I can answer it, but hang on a second. I'm going to share the screen again. And I'm going to read this direct message out loud. Another Placidus house question is the ruler sign of a house, or the sign that has the most degrees in a house, provides stronger influence to that area. Oh, okay. Like with Laura's chart that has only a couple degrees of Taurus in her 7th house, is Gemini influencing that house more overall? That's a good question, Emily. So here we go. Yeah, this is the house she's asking about. So she's saying, gosh, there's only 3 degrees of Taurus in this house. Isn't Gemini more important? And I would say I would say not necessarily. I would say still the Taurian energy is like the gatekeeper. It's like somebody standing at the gate of the house and saying, come in. And are they a Taurian being that is saying, come in? Or are they a Gemini being saying, come in? So the sign that's at the edge of the house is really the welcomer to that house. So it's enormously important, like who is inviting you into that area of your life. But the Gemini energy, particularly because she's got 2 placements there, is going to have a lot to say there, you know? So both are enormously important, but I really want you to have that image of the gatekeeper, the one who invites in, and what quality are they? Yeah. Okay, good. So sometimes when I say something, I'm like, now I have to do that. I got to think about that more, you know, because it is kind of fun to think about that. Like go around your chart and think about who is the figure inviting you in? What is the energy inviting you in? Okay. Yes. And Caitlin, beautiful. Thank you. As you are learning the ruling planets, Caitlin is pointing out that as you're learning the ruling planets, you can also say that. You can also say Venus as the ruler of Taurus is inviting me into the 7th house of relationship. Hallelujah. That's beautiful because it loves to be there, right? So you can think about as we're learning the ruling planets, what planet is inviting you in? You know, Laura's got Scorpio rising. Mars is inviting her into her life, boom, like it's charging in, it's charging within and it's charging without. So think about the planet too, as we're learning them. Okay, I'm going to keep going with the list and then I'll come back to other questions in the chat. So Krista was asking us about retrogrades. And she was just mentioning that she has a friend who was born in December 1977 who has Mars, Mercury, Saturn, and Jupiter all in retrograde. And she said she has mostly fire signs, so I'm intuitively thinking that all that action will help propel her forward. But I know nothing about this, which is a good question. So it's interesting because she has all those fire signs, but if they're retrograde, which is really, by the way, the retrograde is obviously, it's not the planet moving backwards. It's from the perspective of the Earth passing in its orbit. The planet appears to be moving backwards from our perspective. That's a retrograde, right? And it's not a bad thing. Of course, retrogrades have gotten a bad rap because of Mercury retrograde, but it really is a slowing down time, a reviewing and a reflecting time, and a time of inner work. And I would just say, when a person has a bunch of retrogrades in their chart, it's not a bad thing. It's an opportunity. They might assimilate information in a different way. They might need to have a little bit more reflection and receiving energy and a quieter kind of inner work energy. And it's also said that sometimes, particularly I would say the personal planets, when they're retrograde, it might be a little harder to express that energy in the life. And so you have to, let's say Venus is retrograde, you have to pay a little more attention to how you extend the Venusian energy in your life, or Mars retrograde, a lot of times when people are Mars retrograde, they have a really hard time with confrontation or conflict because the Mars is internalized. And so they have to learn how to externalize the Mars. Yeah. So not a bad thing, just a different quality of human. And a lot of times when people have Mercury retrograde in their natal chart, and by the way, just to show you the way that you can see a retrograde in your own chart is if it's red, at least in my program and this chart I gave you, if it's red, that means that the position is retrograde. So right here, the Chiron is retrograde. And you can look at that in the transits as well. Okay. Did anybody else want to say anything about retrogrades that you're please, you're welcome to if you would like.
I just add that they often lead to outside the box approaches.
Yeah. And what I was going to say is a lot of times when we have Mercury retrograde in our natal chart, did I say this already? We feel very comfortable when Mercury is retrograde. We're like, oh, and we're actually feel easeful when Mercury is retrograde. We don't have the same problems, right? So, and we feel like, oh, this is how I like to take in information. And again, Katie, don't worry. It's okay. It's okay. It's just a different way of receiving and giving your energy in the world. And it's more internal and more reflective. And you have to decide if there are parts of you that you want more fully expressed to come forward. Okay. Okay. Now, hang on a second.
And also, Heidi, sometimes in evolutionary astrology, for those who prescribe to reincarnation, it's believed that retrogrades bring energy from past lives. And sometimes it's multi-generational trauma that you bring in your family, and retrogrades will point out to those issues that we need to further resolve, reflect on them in this life, right?
Beautiful, beautiful. Yes, I love that. Thank you for that, Mady. That actually is another deep, beautiful, deep dive, a reflection, like, oh, what did I bring in that I want to work out? What did I bring in that needs still some attention? Yeah. Okay. Now, there's a big question. I just want to touch it. There's a question about shapes of the chart. Okay. So let me just I'll bring up another person that asked, Roshni. By the way, Roshni is looking for a buddy and she's in Central Time Zone. And if you want, if there's somebody that still doesn't have a buddy, let's DM Aaron or Bruno or Caitlin, and we'll connect you guys, because we had connected Roshni, but the time zones were too different. So I'm just going to bring up this chart to answer this question from Aaron. And she just said, I've been curious about overall chart shapes and hemispheres and how you use or don't use that information. So I'm going to just touch on this, and then maybe we'll explore that a little bit more in a future class. But I always say to people like, oh, let's say you knew nothing about astrology and you saw this chart, right? You'd be like, what in the world is going on there? That's what you'd say. And it's purely because of the design. It's purely because of the shape of it. And so there are a bunch of different shapes, right? There are things that are, there are the bowl pattern, there's the bucket pattern, there's the splay pattern, there's the locomotive pattern. I mean, there's a lot of different patterns. So you can study those patterns, but I'm just going to say a couple of things. Obviously, I'm just going to state the obvious here. There's a whole bunch of like little stelliums here. In fact, there's some big stelliums here, and a stellium is when they're all linked up together, right? And when there's a stellium or a collection, there is an intensification of that energy. You can become a specialist in a certain area. You can become the deep diver in a certain area. You know, in Roshni's case, it's like they're definitely divided between 4 houses. So it's, you could hone in on the 12th house, you could hone in on the 10th house to some extent, but you just know something is linked here and specialized here and intense here. Like I once did a chart I had a client for many years who was in an important governmental position, and she had like 8 planets in Scorpio in the 10th house. I mean, it was like, talk about like a deep dive in a certain area. Now, there's the example, but this could also in some ways be called a bucket pattern. And why? Because there's a handle over here. And so if you have a whole bunch of planets in a kind of semicircle over here, and then you have one planet over here that's kind of like a bucket handle, this planet is enormously important. This would be kind of like a directing all your energies to this. You know, so it takes a lot of power when there's a planet opposing a whole collection like that. So you want to pay particular attention to that planet. Like I said, you know, we could spend an hour on this, but another pattern is just like a splash pattern. And I'm not going to show it to you, but it's like if planets are in all the different houses, right? And then you have more of or a splay, you could call it a splay or well, I would call it a splash. I would call it a splash pattern. And it's almost like there's no particular pattern. There's an urge for knowledge all around. There's a taste of everything kind of energy when you have a splash pattern like that. Sometimes there are charts where they're all the oppositions, right? Like 6 planets over here and, you know, 4 planets over here, whatever. Like there's all these like a direct opposition like this. And that's an important thing to look at in terms of these people are often very good. It's called the seesaw, right? Boom, boom, boom. And yes, it can bring indecision or uncertainty, but it can also bring like being really good at listening to different points of view and good at balancing relationships. It's the Libran relationship. You know, in some ways, friends, you can even think about the designs in terms of the signs of the zodiac. So like a stellium has a kind of Scorpio quality to it. It's like deep and intense and investigative. An opposition, a seesaw, has a Libran quality to it, right? A splash maybe has a little bit of a Aquarian quality to it, or maybe a Gemini quality to it. I'll just say one more thing about the design. And that is that when this side of the chart, which is, you know, from the 10th house to the 3rd house there, is mostly lit up with planets, this is a more solo energy side of the chart. It's like, I can do it. I'll pick myself up my bootstraps. I'll do it by myself, right? When this side of the chart is emphasized, it tends to be more collaborative. It tends to be like wanting to seek the partner to do everything. So this can be, you can look at that as well in terms of the more solo activists and the more collaborative people. And then also just generally when the top half of the chart is really emphasized, it's more public, more of your public self in the world. And when the lower half, it's more subjective and personal versus objective and public. Okay. So, and let's just say Roshni had like, I mean, this is almost what I would call a dumping bowl. So the top half of the chart is like, I have so much to give. It's like wants to rain down all of its gifts, you know, when there's a ton at the top. And then when there's a ton at the bottom, it's more like receptive and taking it in. And, you could be a teacher of receptivity with lots of planets at the bottom, a teacher of subjectivity or the feeling sensitivity, the receptive energy. Okay. Okay. And then, Roshni did have a question, which is, if Cancer rules her 7th house, does that mean I tend to make relationships all about me? And I would say, no, not necessarily. It depends on how the evolution of the sign that you're using. You could be deeply nurturing in your relationships. You could be deeply mothering in your relationships. You could want to create a home, a nourishing home for your relationships. And Roshni goes on to say, if you haven't guessed it, my love life desire to have a partner in a traditional way, be a mother, etc., is a deep desire that feels very hard to believe it will ever happen. So always extra curious about these houses as they seem so empty in my chart. And yes, it's the whole thing about empty houses. It does not mean that they won't be lit up, right? It doesn't mean that they don't have a say. And in fact, I would look to these positions like the moon and Venus that are in Scorpio and that are in harmony with your 7th house. We'll learn more about this, but both Cancer and Scorpio are water signs and they're in harmony. And so these guys are going to have an effect on your 7th house. So you want to look at relationships to this point that will help light up this area. Yeah. And for sure, there is a tremendous power and potency in your career, in your connection to helping others. But that does not mean you're bereft here, because even look over here, Jupiter is at 16 degrees Pisces in exact relationship with your descendant, and Venus is at 20 degrees Pisces, and the moon as well. I know this is confusing for some of you, but let me say, they're all water signs. They're all connected. They're making a big triangle. That's a very positive thing that's helping Roshni's 7th house cusp. And then if I bring up the outer ring, which is where all the planets are right now, which we're not going to get into, but as the planets move, guess what? They're going to light up this house, and there's going to be activity in this area. And that's when all kinds of yummy things can happen relationship wise as well. Okay. 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 I'm just trying to make a decision here. All right. I'm going to bring up one more chart. Okay. Open. And then, so we're going to take it, I'm going to read Julie's question out loud, and we've sort of touched on it, but I want to go a little bit deeper. Okay, so here's Julie. I have a look at, and we can all look together. It's exciting. I have a stellium in my 6th house. Venus, Sun, South Node, Neptune, and Mercury, plus my. She says, I don't think this is unusual from what I've read. My understanding, and please correct me if I'm wrong, is that this would be a stellium, even if each of these planets was in a different sign, but all in the 6th house. That's correct. Because you could have, let's say you could have Neptune and Mercury be in Sagittarius, as long as they were close enough to the Scorpio planets. So again, this is math, but look at this. Neptune is at 21 degrees Scorpio. That means there are 8.5 degrees left of Scorpio, and then there are 2 degrees of Sagittarius. So actually, Neptune is about 10 degrees away from Mercury, which is at the far reaches of a conjunction. So in other words, yes, they look like they're sitting right next to each other, but they are 10 degrees away. So Mercury is part of the stellium, but just barely. Right? So you have to, even if they look like they're sitting next to each other, you have to add it up. You have to say, okay, Venus is 2 degrees away from the sun. Great, that's close enough. The sun is 5 degrees away from the south node. That's close enough. The south node is 5 degrees away from Neptune. That's close enough. So they're making a stellium. But you could have a stellium in 2 different signs. That's correct. And then she's asking if it's unusual that they're all in Scorpio. Not necessarily. Not necessarily unusual. It's just that at certain times, the way the heavens line up, a bunch of planets enter a sign and you've got babies born with that lineup, right? But it does intensify things. It might not be unusual, but it's still intense. And she says, what does all this Scorpio energy in the 6th house mean? So what I would immediately say about Scorpio in the 6th house is the 6th house is the house of physical, emotional, and mental health. Scorpio is the energy of the deep dive. You can have rigorous healers with this combination. You can have people that really want to get to the heart of the obstruction in terms of health and wellness. You can have people that, here you also have to be careful because the 6th house of Virgo can be a very critical house inwardly, and Scorpio can bring a lot of intensity to that criticism. So you have to be careful about that. The 6th house is also the house of your day-to-day work. So you could be rigorous and devoted and tenacious in terms of your day-to-day work. You could be an incredible researcher in the field of wellness. I mean, those are just some examples, not the only examples. You could be a tenacious editor. You could be a badass copywriter. Anybody else have ideas about that combo? Another general question I have. Yeah, this is a good one. Another general question I have is, how much, in your opinion, is considered a lot of something in a chart? How many planets in a particular house is considered a lot, right? And I would just say 3 or more. That's what I would say. But again, it's an intuitive feeling, but I would say 3 or more feels like a lot, like you notice it. Again, if you were looking at this chart with Julie, you'd be like, where do I look first? Bring, right? Because it's just a collection there, right? Okay. Okay, why don't you read me some questions that have come in that feel, that would be helpful. We've got a few more minutes. And so let's, is there something else that have come in that I should answer? If not, there's another. Yeah.
One last one that we just got was, how often are charts changing? Like if you are to do a reading, how long does that reading actually hold for? And that was Katie. Okay, Katie. Yeah. So forever, it depends on the reading you're doing. So if I am doing a natal chart reading, a reading of your birth chart, this is it, friends. This is your chart forever. This is Julie's chart forever. And I could spend 10 sessions just talking about Julie's natal chart. And you could just for your entire life, ignore what was going on in the heavens. And you could be like, this is my map that I need to figure out. And I need to figure out how to evolve the energy of Scorpio. And I need to figure out how to evolve into my best Gemini, communicating blending of duality self. And you could work rigorously with your natal chart for a lifetime. Okay. But a lot of people come into astrology saying, how's next year look, right? And how can I use the energies of next year or next month? And so what I've just brought up is that outer ring, which is where all the planets are right now. So watch the outer ring for a second, and I'm going to move it ahead by the week. Okay. So just watch how it is always changing and moving forward, because of course the planets are always changing and moving forward. So when we look at a transit reading, we're looking at where are the planets. Like right now, Julie has Saturn at the top of her chart, which is at the midheaven. So she might be making some big decisions around her career. And I could spend 15 minutes with her, 20 minutes with her talking about Saturn at the 10th house and how do you want to use this energy of commitment and decision-making and maturity and authority
in the realm of your career over the next 2 years, because that's how long Saturn's going to hang out there. But then if I talk to her 2 years from now, I'm not going to talk about that because it's going to have moved on. So in the notebook we sent you, or the most recent handouts we sent you, there is a handout about the orbital time periods of the planets. So you can look at how long the planets take to go around the chart and how long they're going to spend in any given house. So in a reading, a transit reading, you're looking at what's happening now, what cycle am I in now, how can I use that cycle to my advantage or to for my growth. And that's why you can work with people throughout a lifetime, because the planets are always moving. So I've worked with clients for 20 years, 25 years, and every time we meet, it looks different, right? Okay, hope that helps. And any other questions, Bruno or Caitlin?
There is one quick question. You might have answered this already, but just asking for more information about the midheaven.
Yeah, so midheaven is one of the main of the cross, you know, and remember the first class, we looked at this as the midheaven. This is the IC, the bottom of the chart, even though it doesn't look like the bottom of the chart. This is the ascendant and this is the descendant. So they're 4 really, really important positions. And the midheaven has to do with the purpose point, the career point, the point of like how you might stand in the world, the quality of energy that you want to bring to your career offering, to your public offering, to your, it's also, I could even call it a parental offering because of the 10th house being the father. So it's the point that has everything to do with your kind of work in the world, and your offering in the world. Okay. Somebody's asking about going through the sequence again of reading your chart. I believe it's the sun planet in which sign and which house. Yeah, we were talking about this a little bit last time, but it's like the way that I would read it is I would say, Julie's sun is in Scorpio in the 6th house. And then I might say, conjunct Venus, sitting next to Venus, right? I mean, you can start to weave that in too, but that's how I'd read it. I'd read it planet, sign, house, but we had a great example in the last class of starting with the house and then inviting the planet into the house. So you can play with that. Soon we're going to give you a little workbook that you can fill in the positions and think about, like, practice filling in those positions. Okay, I'm going to say one more thing because that zoomed by, but I want to say one more thing about the group that's forming the classroom space. So you all got the message from Erin that the classroom space is now ready and it's on Luminosity. Yes, you do have to enter your credit card information, but no, you will not have to pay for it. So you have to enter the information to get in, but then at the end of class, you just can cancel it and you will not be charged anything. So you also do not have to join. But if you join, you'll have access to all of Luminosity for these couple of months. And all of Luminosity is pretty rich and exciting because there's lots of meditations going on and lots of classes going on, not classes, but classes that have been recorded previously that you have access to, that you just have access through this class. So yes, you do have to enter your credit card information. It is free during this class. And Erin is standing at the ready to help any of you if there are issues. You will still receive all the handouts and the audios of these, no matter if you join or not. So it's up to you, okay? It's up to you. Okay. That's a good idea, Hannah. Yes, Erin, can you make a note of that? We will email you when the free membership is running out, so you can make sure to cancel it if you want to cancel it. But I'm going to say one more thing about what we're doing on Luminosity right now. Ellie Latrobe, Caitlin Mulder, myself right now are going to be leading the meditations around the new moon and the full moon. Bruna Maya is going to be offering every month a breakdown of the transits that we're going to be working with that month. That's amazing, amazing. And so it's going to start to be a really rich interactive space. Mady Santos is going to come in and teach every month. She's a master teacher. And I'm going to hop on and do Q&As and such, and occasionally be like, I have a poem for you. Okay, so it's a very Aquarian community. I didn't even know what I was creating when we created it, and now I'm like, oh, it's an Aquarian community, and we're gonna be having an Aquarian experience. So I would recommend coming to taste it and try it out. But again, you don't have to, and again, it's free, and for these 3 months. And reach out to Erin with questions. Okay. Thank you, friends. Keep sending in your questions. I will see you on Wednesday, and big love to you. You're doing great. Yay for astrology. You're brilliant students. Have a gorgeous day. Bye.